Welcome to If Prices Could Talk, the podcast where we dive into the art and science of pricing, sales, and negotiation. I'm your host, Tracy Dent. Join me as we explore strategies and current events shaping the future of pricing power in B2B, featuring insights from industry leaders and subject matter experts. Let's jump into today's conversation. This episode is a Greg special. So we've got Greg James. This is the third episode we've done with Greg. First episode was about Intel and unpacking their journey over the last at least 30 years. Then we did one on AI and DeepSeek and what's happening with quote unquote the AI race. You guys will have to say how you tripped into this conversation, but this came up and then it seemed to be a good topic for the podcast. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that, Jeet.
Yeah, Greg and I always have these conversations that really focus on, why people buy, how they buy, how will that change over time. The market really is about making money and spending money, is basically what propels our economy, right? Making money and spending money will affect how we market our products, how we price our products, how we sell our products, how we consume the products that we buy, products and services. All of those things has this like trickle down effect from some of these macro events that are happening. So that's essentially the start that Greg and I had of some of these conversations of what's happening in this world today and what impact could that possibly have on us moving forward.
What we focus on is kind of what are fundamental human behaviors that drive our actions in the economy, so our buying decisions and things like that. So what motivates consumption? And we were talking about that in terms of consumers, but we're also talking about that in terms of businesses. And I think one of the things that we were talking about earlier about maybe touching on in this episode is looking at consumer behavior versus B2B behavior. Is there a difference? What are the similarities? What are the differences and things like that?
It used to be, or it has been, that there's B2B selling and there's B2C transactions, and they're two different galaxies. And how dare you act like they're similar? And now it's starting to look like B2B is mirroring a lot of what's happening in B2C, especially as people are hungry for authenticity. You see a lot of the influencer stuff coming into play. So how does that feel as a starting point?
Yeah, I think that's a right place to start, right? Because I do feel like we have compartmentalized B2B and B2C so much that we have developed sort of these marketing is different, sales is different, pricing is different. We've kind of created these silos. And I think in reality, those silos don't exist. It's actually one silo. It's a buying behavior. And in that buying behavior, I do believe, let's say there are 10 variables that we all as humans use to buy something. Now, those weights on those 10 variables can be different and will be different based on if you're a B2B purchaser or if you're a B2C purchaser. And the way you sell to B2B and B2C will be different. But those variables don't tend to change too much, meaning, as an example, humans are naturally emotional purchaser. And B2B, we feel like we don't put enough weight on that emotion part of it. And I think that's a mistake. I think we should put more weight in a B2B environment, in a sales transaction that says, I'm selling to a human. That human needs to feel good about making this purchase. And we need to put a little bit more weight on that feeling rather than it being very transactional and ROI only related and period. There's nothing else. I don't think it's as cold as that. I think there needs to be a little bit more warmth. Just like on the B2C side, it's not just about impulse buy and only impulse buy. I mean, there has to be a little bit more of that ROI-driven sales methodology in there as well that says, hey, here's the value that you get from consuming this product or service. And there needs to be a little bit more of that transactional piece and less waiting on only that emotional fear, emotional euphoria that you feed onto to make that purchase. So I think there's a little bit of balancing that needs to happen from where we are today.
There's a utility dimension where a consumer will make a purchase decision to, say, solve a problem. So let's say they're going to buy a car, they want to solve a problem, they need transportation, right? So buying a car solves that utility problem. But then there's these other dimensions that drive the decision, which car, what color, all those kinds of things. And those dimensions have elements of things like signaling.
Yeah.
Like, one reason someone might buy a particular car is they want to signal something to others. I'm successful, whatever that means, and that's a certain car choice, or I'm adventurous, and that's a different car choice, and things like that. So there's this signaling element. There's, maybe a more of a pure emotional element where a car is kind of a treat to oneself. They've achieved some milestone in their lives and they've always imagined getting a car like this. I think the stereotype is like when you reach midlife, you treat yourself with a sports car, something like that.
Hmm.
But there's some sort of a emotional sort of self-treat element there. Maybe that's the dimension. So there's these dimensions driving consumer behavior. And what I'm wondering about is looking at B2B, do those same dimensions exist? So is there a signaling
Yeah.
dimension?
Yeah,
Is there
I'll
a,
give you I'll
yeah.
give you a great example. There's a old adage that said nobody got fired for, buying IBM or hiring McKinsey or whatever it might
Mm,
be. And I think that that's almost exactly like that. That says, hey, these are big brand names that are out there. And if I tie my company to that big brand name, I can't go, I can't do any wrong. So it's a safe bet. And I can also tell people that I use Salesforce.com as an example, even though I only use like 1% of its capabilities, and users only use like 10% of whatever. I could still tell other people and signal to other people, oh yeah, my organization uses
I
Salesforce.com. It's
got the
like a
Bentley.
That's right. I got the best of the best, and I think that is similar to what you're saying. Now, again, I don't know if the weight I wouldn't put for that attribute or for that dimension. I don't know if it's that big as it might be for a consumer, but I think that dimension still exists. It might
mhm.
be a small weighting, but it still exists. A smaller, I should say.
Oh, I was just going to say, and probably as it is for consumers, it varies from company to company,
All
just
right.
like from
That's right.
consumers. Some consumers could care less what other people think about their buying purchases or buying
Yeah.
decisions, and others are very conscious of that. And I
Yeah.
think it's probably the same that companies, some are very sensitive to it and some are not.
Yeah.
I was just thinking because there's the brand and what the brand that you're purchasing says about you as a leader or as a company or whatever. But then there's also the motivations and if you're a CEO and you're at a certain point in your career and you're looking at the legacy that you're leaving. And is this company going to get me there faster? Or things like that, which are just a different lens to a similar thing, which is understanding how people make decisions, but on an individual basis for the company as they go to influence others to make the decision, you know?
Yeah, it's really interesting. So Kotler is a professor in marketing, and he's written tons of different books, and a lot of people call him the father of marketing. So there's a lot, and he had a lot to say about B2B to B2C as he's kind of done his research. One of the things that he's written is I think the book is called Marketing 3.0, where he takes companies that goes through 1.0, 2.0, and 3.0. And 1.0 is like mind where it's like profitability. Then he calls the 2.0 heart, and the 3.0 is like spirit. And the spirit is like, what good are you doing for the world? Like the company transforms themselves into this sort of brand that's like that transcends the products that they create. So they asked a bunch of questions like, who do you consider to be like the brand of our time? A lot of people talk about Apple, they talk about Amazon, and they talk about these companies that have transcended sort of that world of transactions, right? They've gone into this world of spirit, and he has like a couple of different levels, within that, depending on how you want to measure it. But regardless, the concept is interesting to me because it it kind of takes us away from this sort of silos of B2B to B2C, and it puts us into a brand conversation that kind of it combines everything together into this word spirit, just to use his vocabulary, this word spirit that says, hey, at some point, you need to be more than just transactional. You need to be more, and you have to connect with your audience at a spiritual level, essentially, to make your brand transcend from transaction to this level of spirituality, right?
Hmm.
And I think that's sort of the journey that a lot of companies want to go on, whether
It's
they're
so funny because it feels like it goes against people's hunger as a sales organization to be data driven and have a process and follow the steps and know here's the best practice for how we close enterprise sales or whatever, right? And then thinking from this lens, you would think it would almost either challenge that or topple it or something of the certainty of like, here's exactly how you do it.
Yeah, it's interesting to me because it's almost like I think the thing that gets to in my head is it manufactured? Do you still have that sales and you have those steps, but you create those steps in order for you to get to a certain level, but you're almost manufacturing those steps. You say, okay, I've got a customer. That customer is going to be transactional with me, but over time, I'm going to co-create with the customer. So now we're engaged in a deeper relationship. Then I'm going to go from co-creation to that customer is going to market for me. So as an example, like Nike has a very large marketing budget, but their marketing is really people wearing their shoes, people talking about their shoes. So when your customers advocate for you, so that there's an advocacy component of it, then your brand transcends that transaction and it goes to this sort of euphoric nature of some of the spiritual nature of these brands. So you get there, but there was still a process for you to get there. So it's almost like a manufactured spirituality or whatever it is, in that brand that's occurred. And it's an interesting question, Tracy, which is, did they get there by doing all the right things, or was there something else that like made them go, using Kotler's word, 2.0 to 3.0, was there something else that kind of triggered some of these companies to get to that stage or level?
Which is some soul driving or soul giving or soul connecting,
Yeah. Yeah.
intangible, also known as like differentiation from a brand perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah, it may be that those processes, the manufacturing part, is what enables them to basically develop a relationship. And it may be that once the companies have achieved that relationship level, like some companies in the consumer space, like Apple and Apple advocates, right?
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
consumers who use their products. You would describe that as it looks more like a relationship than any
Right.
sort of transactional
Right. Right.
thing.
Right.
So the processes allow the companies to develop a relationship, and it takes time to get there. But once you
Yeah.
get there, now you're on a different plane. Um, again, it's like human behavior. Humans
Yeah.
just meet; they don't really necessarily connect on a deep level. But once they get to know each other and develop a relationship, now it's on a different plane.
Yeah. Bringing it back to B2B to B2C, maybe Apple is a great example to use because when we were growing up, maybe not Tracy, but when Greg and I were growing up, you know, we had, Apple was
Back
sort
in the
of
day.
this back in the day. Apple was what it was, education was the market that they went after, and it was personal and education, right? Businesses was all PC based. PCs were doing well, but that B2B to B2C merge that happened as soon as Apple started hitting that spiritual 3.0, Kotler's 3.0, they started bringing in those devices into the business, right? People were demanding it. People are like, no, I'm used to my Apple ecosystem. I want it in my workspace. And now, like even at Holden, I think probably more than 50% use Apple, and the other, let's say 40% like myself have a PC, right? And so I think there is that when you get to a certain level, there is that mix that happens between B2B to B2C that really doesn't exist. So, the question is, should you, if you're not at that level from a brand perspective, should you still have a B2B or a B2B and a B2C focus, or should you look at people as individuals and humans because they make buying decisions like a human, Therefore, you're selling to a human. You're not selling to a company or an inanimate object. You're selling it to a human. So are we doing B2B wrong because we don't have more of the B2C principles or dimensions that we bring in?
One of the things that got this conversation started was you guys did a podcast. You were talking about some of the Super Bowl ads,
Mm.
Mhm.
and there were some ads that were more B2B. Now, the companies are escaping my memory, but there were B2B ads during the Super
Yeah.
Bowl. So it
Salesforce did one with Matthew McConaughey.
Salesforce
there you
did
go.
one. Yeah.
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 So it appears that some companies are seeing it more like um, eh, sort of engaging with people rather than companies,
Yeah.
right? So why advertise during the Super Bowl? Certainly you have the audience there. But the Super Bowl is, it's a sort of a fun event. People are getting together, they're partying, whatever. It's not, I guess, in a classic sense, it may not be a place where you're thinking about the cold logic of business, but you're a person
That's
and
right.
you're part of a business. And so marketing to you there makes sense. And marketing to you as a human, as a person who happens to be part of a business um, seems like an effective approach that some companies have sort of latched onto.
I think Tracy, you sent a article for GoDaddy, I believe, right? Which was one of the, I guess, voted one of the best Super Bowl ads that really hit it big. Which, GoDaddy is obviously a B2B company.
Mhm.
They make websites amongst other things. But the ad was fascinating because it really, I think it focused in on where the issue is, right? Which is, most people work for a small business in some way. If you look at the mass, you work for a small business. In which case you're working for a human that's built something, and this human is good at something, so they built a company, but they're not good at other things. So you could have a law firm that might not be good at, building websites. So they kind of targeted them in a very fun. I thought the ad was fantastic. It was very fun, very sort of, making fun of them, fun of themselves, but not really. But the message was very clear that they were targeting humans that have small businesses that have these worries. But they targeted it in a very fun way in the Super Bowl ad. And I thought it was very effective the way they did it. And it was a signal of this merge of B2B and B2C together. And you're right, Greg. There's other companies like Deloitte who's been, they do all these. They have such a huge budget. It seems like they're sponsoring tennis and F1 and all sorts of stuff. So they're everywhere. But they're a B2B company. So what are you doing? With these sports, sponsorships and stuff like
Mhm.
that. But I think they may be onto something where they are targeting humans and making themselves more of this 3.0 spiritual level of branding and trying to get to that level instead of staying in this transactional world of ROI for a B2B company.
There were two other layers to this Super Bowl commercial. Walton Goggins was the star of the commercial. And yeah, it's a GoDaddy commercial. He started a goggles brand sometime between when he stopped filming The White Lotus and when it came live. So that was like number one, is that they kind of grabbed the cultural zeitgeist. I don't know if they did this all coordinated with The White Lotus, but everybody, like The White Lotus as a show, their numbers are out of this world. So first of all, you've got Walton Goggins, who is launching a goggles brand, and it's like this snowboard, like around the back of the head kind of thing. And then he used GoDaddy as a business, like as an entrepreneur, to build the website. And that was part of the thinking behind the brand. And then partnering with him is that he's an actual customer. And I don't know if they figured that out beforehand or they knew what he was going to do and maybe it doesn't matter. But those two levels of it, that he was an actual customer of theirs and that also he was about to skyrocket to fame, like currently because of the White Lotus, both I think also worked in their favor. So it's
Yeah.
interesting because I think a lot of consumer brands do that. Think about Nike, think about
Mhm.
Skims, whoever is, especially with shows like the White Lotus, where you have people that get extra famous because of some specific thing and then it kind of quiets down. But that moment where you grab those right people that everyone's talking about already was an interesting one for the Super Bowl commercial.
This is actually a great transition, by the way, a transition point for us to go from, what we just talked about with B2B to B2C to how are people buying differently today?
Mm,
Because this is a perfect example of consumerism changing. Because right now, there's more and more money going into influencers. It doesn't matter if you're B2B, doesn't matter if you're B2C. Everybody's on TikTok, everybody's on Instagram. They're flipping through, except for Greg. Everybody else is on it. Greg is the only one holding out. He's still holding out on it. But so using these influencers to sell, it doesn't matter if it's a B2B product or a B2C product, is going through the roof, right? I mean, we saw it probably about 5 years ago. We saw influencers making it into movies. Now we're seeing movies change, and influencers are driving more of the podcast conversations. They're driving more of the whatever, the YouTube shorts and things like that. So everything seems to be changing of how we're consuming information, how we're entertaining ourselves, who is influencing us. All of these things are changing from a consumerism perspective. And I'm wondering how that affects companies now that are trying to market, target, and frankly price for, for my selfish reasons. I think pricing is going to be different now because people are buying different. Why wouldn't it be different?
And
Right?
this idea of, so I was doing a little research before this of like who was the first celebrity endorsement? Because these have kind of changed over the years, right? The first, like it sent me back to like Lucille Ball and the Marlboro Man and all that
Oh,
kind of
that's
stuff.
interesting.
mhm.
Then
Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
thinking, so it's just like this concept is not new, right? But then how they think about the endorsement and who the person is and what that looks like. Because even a couple years ago, so maybe 10 years ago when I was doing a project with Shark Ninja, they secured Sofia Vergara. And at that
Mm.
time in 2015 was like, oh my God, this is the coolest thing ever. And then years after that, you had somebody like Taco Bell who secured Lil Nas X as like the chief creative officer. And then that was something for a while where you had people that were celebrities that had like a vanity title, like on the leadership team.
Mhm.
That was a trend for a little bit. But it almost seems like opposite. Like there was a article in the Wall Street Journal last week or the week before where you had Mr. Beast who's come out with his own show. And now you've got these streaming services who are building brands and shows around people. And so I think as this has evolved over time, the idea is not new, but how people engage and what kind of compels them towards certain people and in what ways does feel like it's still evolving.
There's an interesting sort of a link between marketing and entertainment, right? So you talk about going all the way back to Lucille Ball. So back in that day, the entertainer, there weren't very many channels of entertainment available to people in their daily lives. So there are a few, I guess, TV channels and movies. But the celebrities sort of started there and they had a large audience kind of concentrated on those celebrities. So it was natural for them to be hired as spokespeople for products. And it seems like now people are able to garner audiences without first becoming entertainers.
Mm.
So someone like Mr. Beast or someone like um,
TikTok, like Alex Earl, like those people who have like
exactly.
millions of what follower kind of thing. Yeah.
Right. So they develop a huge following, and then entertainment comes along and says,
Yeah.
"Hey,
Yeah.
we would like you to develop some entertainment content." And so we see what Netflix is doing um, with Mr. Beast and so on. But the worlds are kind of coming together again, but just in a different way. So first it was everything started with entertainment, and then marketing and product endorsements came from that. Then nowadays we see more marketing and product endorsements starting over here and entertainment coming along and wanting
Yeah.
to merge
Yeah.
and take advantage of that audience that already exists. There we go.
So let's say entertainment, which it is an industry, but let's for this analogy, let's use it as a true industry, just like manufacturing would be in others. So entertainment now is changing. It's fundamentally changing, right? Because you had all these actors, these trained actors in entertainment, and now you don't have trained actors. You have influencers. You have social media stars, that have more power than a movie actor. And now entertainment now is changing in order to bring them into the fold, in order to market entertainment as an industry and be successful. But they're also changing how they go to market because people don't want to sit in movie theaters for 3 hours. So now there's more shorts going on. There's more of other types of content that entertainment is producing. Now there's merging of studio houses going on, right? Netflix is becoming sort of a platform in a lot of different ways that's combining content with technology, with all these other different aspects of their platform. So I think that change is happening because of this phenomena of how we are buying, how we're getting influenced by these characters, lack of better phrasing here, by these characters in Instagram and characters in TikTok, because they're influencing us as buyers. Entertainment is changing in order to fit what's happening. And I'm wondering how it's going to make manufacturing change. I'm wondering how it's going to make software change. I'm wondering how it's going to make, distribution change, because it's going to have a trickle down effect. All of these things will have a trickle down effect of, how do we support the change that's coming, and it's going to get even more of consumerism.
Hey, let's explore that a little bit more. Entertainment changing. I guess the question I have in my mind is so we look at the influencers and they develop an audience and they talk about, in many cases, they talk about products. So they become sort of spokes people for different products. But they sort of mix that with entertainment. But the revenue stream is basically from sponsorship and advertisement, right? So the audience isn't paying to see the influencer. They're paying with their time, but they're not paying with their dollars. In the traditional entertainment industry, so you go to see a blockbuster movie, you are paying money to see it. So what'll be interesting is to see what happens as entertainment industry like Netflix embracing an influencer and developing entertainment with the influencer. Will the audience want to pay to see that influencer? Or will the revenue stream for a company like Netflix shift from the audience to some other source like
Hmm.
advertising?
I think
Uh,
that's a really good question. I think we see it in some like some of the podcast product placements everywhere, right? Your energy drink is like turned on the vlog towards the camera, so you know that you're drinking a Red Bull or whatever it might be in a podcast, right? So you're being sponsored. So there's product placement in a lot of these influencer ads, and a lot of these influencers are also selling and selling these products outright directly. So, they have different channels that they're doing these things. So I think you bring up a really good point is Netflix is a good example, I guess, to use because they will definitely still have a large part of their revenue stream be the monthly subscription. But I think it's going to, as they embrace more of these influencers, I think the product placement and product marketing dollars that they're going to get might start getting to be a bigger number than the subscription numbers that are out there because they'll have it.
yeah, this would be an interesting one to revisit at some point down the road
Yeah,
to see how this evolves.
these influencers are companies by themselves now. They're multimillionaires. They could get into billions fairly soon here, and they are companies by themselves. So they are getting product marketing dollars. So them using Netflix I don't know if they need to use Netflix for that product, those product revenue dollars and things like that. They're probably going to use Netflix to grow their subscription base and still get the direct dollars from the different companies instead of trying to go through Netflix. So Netflix in return has to figure out how do they get a piece of that. And that's
Hmm.
gonna, that'll be interesting because relationship dynamics would change, right? No longer Red Bull wouldn't go to Netflix. Red Bull would go to Mr. Beast, and then Mr. Beast maybe gives a percentage to Netflix in order to, put them into various channels. That could be it.
I was just checking out this Wall Street Journal article that Tracy that you shared with us, and they do touch on that, right? So someone like Mark Rober, um, if he is tapped to do something for Netflix, well, if you've seen his podcasts or his videos on YouTube, he does use them as a way to promote his Crunch Labs. And I guess there is, some sticking, some friction between him and Netflix in discussing, can he talk about Crunch Labs and something that's on Netflix, right? Netflix wouldn't benefit directly from that. He would.
Yeah.
So,
I think that's an interesting one from where we are today. The transition that I would love to go to is where is this headed? Right? Where are we going? Because there's a lot of data and stats that are out there that says the Gen Zs that are coming up now, they are not spending time buying things. They're not, they don't want to have high powered jobs that are making a ton of money and they don't want to spend a ton of money. They want to have they want to work in microdoses. They want to work for 2 months and then go walk around Europe for 4 months and then come back and work a few months and then go disappear somewhere else, right? It's a true gig economy, right? That's out there. But that's that, so how does this sort of the consumerism of these micro influencers to these grand influencers and how it's changing our economies, how is that going to align with these Gen Zs and what they're thinking about doing and how they're purchasing, how they're making money, and then how are they spending money? Because that's all fundamentally changing, which begs the question, does capitalism need to get a facelift? Is the way we know and the way we grew up with capitalism, does that need a facelift with everything that we're talking about right now?
it may be that consumption just at the transaction level
Yeah.
sort of continues, maybe not to the extreme that we've seen with previous generations, but it continues. I'm going to hit the pause button and come back to this idea of we had mentioned earlier. We were talking about with B2B and also B2C that companies develop a relationship with their customers, right? So influencers have developed a relationship with their audience, right?
Right.
And the companies basically want to tap into that. So they have a relationship by proxy, right? They link up with the influencers, and that gives them sort of a jump start on the relationship with the customer.
Yeah.
Um, and so I guess in a sense, that's similar to what we've seen all along. We talked about stars like Lucille Ball promoting products. And the idea there was Lucille Ball had a relationship with her audience. People kind of felt like they knew her, even though they only knew her from the characters she played on screen. But they felt like they had a relationship with her. And so companies would ask her to endorse their products or services, and that sort of gave them a connection to the audience. The audience like, "Oh, Lucille Ball, you are my person. You like this product? Okay, I trust it."
Yeah. Yeah.
So the dynamics with influencers is really kind of the same thing. It's just the audience happens to be there instead of with someone on screen. So in a sense, you could say those dynamics that it looks like something's changing. It may be the same dynamics that we've seen all along. So the human behavior hasn't fundamentally changed. So now getting to the question of what we see with the Gen Zs, um, they are consuming, but maybe just a different sort of ratio. So maybe consuming more experiences, less things, but how they make the decisions of what they're going to buy or what experiences they're going to have. To some extent, they turn to other people that they have relationships with to get ideas. And some of those people are influencers. And so companies will continue to go to the influencers to tap into that relationship that they have with the customers.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's a, we used to say this when I was running digital marketing for one of the companies. We used to talk about influencing the influencers. So you don't target the market, you influence the influencers. And I think that exists without a doubt, and that will continue to exist because I think that's the best way to make a dollar that's out there is to be able to do it that way. The issue is, you know, we haven't seen this type of a change from a generation in purchasing behavior as we're seeing with the Gen Zs. It hasn't existed before. You know,
Mm.
I think there was data that's out there that just alcohol consumption, as an example, Gen Z is at like, 12 billion or 13 billion, Tracy, something like that, compared to 24 billion for the other generations that they spend. So
Mhm.
the alcohol consumption is like at the all-time lowest with this generation. And I think that trend is going to continue. So fundamentally, there's an industry that's out there that's going to have to change. So it's changing. So it's causing it to change, right? So athletic brewing is a great example. They're doing really, really well. There's other sort of non-alcohol products that Anheuser-Busch and other large alcohol companies are moving towards. Heineken Zero is taking off like crazy. So there's a lot of business foundationally that are changing to meet the needs and the change in behavior that they're seeing from this new generation.
Mhm.
Now, so that's going to happen, right? That happens in every generation where, there's some things that are going to be different. But that overall spend, so there's the spend of what you just said, which is, changing from category to category. So I'm not going to spend as much on alcohol, but I'm going to spend a lot of money on Heineken Zero as an example. Great. Heineken still benefits, because they're just shifting the dollars from one bucket to the other. No problem, because I'm sure Heineken Zero is not $1 for the $10 that you lose for a beer. It's not going to be a buck. They're going to still charge like $8 for it. So you're still going to make plenty of money. So it's all good. But the question are they still spending the same amount? If people spend $1,000 a month on discretionary spending today, are they going to spend $1,000 a month with this new generation coming in? And statistics shows that they will not, that it
Mhm.
will be less than half. Now, they are going to move whatever they're spending it on, they're going to move it more towards experiences, right? So you are going to see a shift to new industries that are popping up of, hey, let me curate a 2-month trip to Europe of an experience for you, and they're going to spend money on that. So that absolutely, there's going to be new industries. But I think there is a foundational problem that's going to occur with Gen Z spending overall less. And if they spend overall less, if this trend continues and they're not in relationships, they're not having babies, right? So let's add that into this mix. So all of a sudden, there's 50% less dollars that's moving around from business to business, businesses, not B2B, but just businesses. And there is a lack of procreation that's happening. What does that mean?
Oh boy. You know what? One thing I was wondering as you were sharing this, we've seen companies moving from selling goods, let's say devices and things like that, to selling subscriptions. Um, like I know with, let's say, a service provider like T-Mobile, you can have a plan that you pay a little extra, you can get a new phone pretty much every year, right? Instead of buying a phone once every so many years, you have this subscription, so they benefit from ongoing revenue, and the consumer benefits from a new device every year. I'm wondering if Gen Z is moving in that direction, not so much interested in owning more things, but still wanting the same kind of access to utility. So they still want a cell phone, they still want, a tablet, all these other things, still want transportation, but they don't necessarily want to own a car. And so when you aggregate all that spending for the subscription and stuff, how does that compare to the spending on devices and cars and things like that over time? Do you follow what I'm?
Yeah. Yeah, it's still so economists are saying that it's still less for this generation. The generation still hasn't grown up yet. So there's a lot of caveats here, right? Because it's still very, very early. But given what their spending power has been like, it's much, much less. Even if you include subscriptions, if you use experiences, vacation dollars, and all of those things, and we'll talk a little bit later about platforms, because I think that is sort of, Kotler talked about it a little bit, is what's the 4.0 after the spiritual, and he thinks it's probably something around platforms. So Amazon as a platform, Apple as a platform instead of products. And I think that goes to a little bit of what you're talking about, Greg, which is, hey, we're going to go to just give me $100 a month, and these are all the services that I will provide for you. So you don't have to think about it. You'll have the latest phone, you'll have the latest whatever, and just give me $100 a month and I'll take care of everything for you. Right. I think there is definitely going to be a move towards something like that. And it's not just going to be in technology. I think we saw it, and Tracy and I were talking about it in clothing, where, you're recycle, you're moving the same, like I'll get 3 shirts out of the month, I'll wear it, and then I'll put it in a box and send it. They'll clean it, they'll fix things that might be torn or whatever, and they'll send it to somebody else. And it just like you recycle your clothes, because we have such an issue with the fast fashion and how much clothing is out there in the landfills. So you're going to see industries like that where people are going to opt in. And Gen Zs are very conscious about sustainability. So they're going to pay, let's say $200 a month, and they're only going to have 15 things in their closets. And that 15 things are going to recycle every month. And they're going to wear somebody else's clothes, basically. They're not going to own clothes. So that movement 1000% is going to be there, and there's more and more companies popping up that support that type of an infrastructure that's out there, right? So I think that's there, but the overall spend still is not to the effect of how the other generations do it. It's still tracking at about half the spend as other
Oh,
generations,
interesting.
and
So the
that's
flip
the
Oh, I was just gonna
and
say, so the flip side of that, their savings rate
right.
is much higher than
That's
previous.
correct.
So
That's correct.
it'll be interesting to see if generational time scales, whether this behavior is sustained, or will
Right.
there be a shift, when, household wealth, um, I guess individual wealth, because they're not getting married or having kids or whatnot. But
That's right. That's right.
when household wealth, gets to a certain level, will consumption behaviors change?
Yeah, and there's other dynamics that they're talking about right now, which is they don't want to have a VP level job, as an example. They don't
Yeah.
want to have management jobs. So you're also capping what they're going to make, because they want to have they're more concerned about their lifestyle. They want
Hmm.
to have a better lifestyle. So the quality of life is important to them. So you've got sort of, they don't want to have ownership, they don't want to spend, and they want to have sort of limited time at work. So that essentially goes against a lot of those principles that the US economy definitely has been built on, and to a large part the global economy has been built on. And they're just poking at those, like they're pulling those like strings that basically bond all of us together in this economy. So
Well, as you said before, it's terrible for the economy as it's currently
that's
structured,
right. That is correct.
right?
That is correct.
So,
And that's what I called, our 2.0. Is this time to talk about economy 2.0? That's, we've built it so far with our traditional notion of capitalism. You make money and you spend money. And that's how this whole conversation started. And now it's so different in how you're making money and how you want to make money. And it's also very different in how you're spending money. So if those things are drastically changing, it's begging for capitalism 2.0 to happen. And capitalism, obviously, I'm using these terms loosely because capitalism has evolved quite a bit since capitalism was first instituted. So it's not like it hasn't changed since then. Of course, it's changed, and it changes every year, every generation, every whatever you fill in the blank. But I think we're in for a larger change. I think there's something that's out there that's begging for a 2.0 revision because of the fundamental generation that's coming up, the fundamentally changing the way they make money and spend money, that's going to cause that economy to change. So there's going to be a whole shift and change that happens, and the company has to evolve with it, all these different types of companies. And I think you're seeing that. I think it's going to be really interesting to see how Google being as large as they are, Amazon being as large as they are, even Tesla right now, how they evolve to that, becoming more and more like that platform. What other things go on it? Like Amazon's already doing prescription. They're buying healthcare services. They bought One Medical. So they're in these spaces. You don't think, you think of Amazon as the shopping marketplace, but they're doing a lot more than just a shopping marketplace. They're in any type of marketplace that a human would want. Amazon's trying to touch it, pull it into that platform, that sort of world, and they're going to probably have different pricing mechanisms. Like Greg said, why would I not just say, here, Amazon, take my $1,000 per month, and I'm going to outsource all these things that I typically buy from you. I'm just going to say, just send it to me at this cadence. Right now, we have coffee that gets delivered every 3 months, and they just charge the credit card, right? It's a way of being subscription, and they give me a discount for doing that. So Kelly and I have a subscription of coffee that gets sent to our house every 3 months. And so they're going to do that with more and more goods. They're going to package those goods together. We're going to give them a certain dollar per month, and they're going to just provide us with those goods and services, and it's just going to keep going. So I think companies are going to evolve because our buying behavior is evolving, and we're going to move towards that. So absolutely, that's going to happen. Maybe, like we fix some things, but other things start breaking. And then the next generation, maybe they'll start fixing that, and other things will start breaking for them, and they're going to try to fix that, right? Maybe there's a little circular sort of circle of life that happens, and entropy. That's right.
Entropy.
That's right. That's exactly right. And that's exactly maybe that's the tie. Maybe that's the bow tie on this thing. This could be just following nature's process here in some ways.
hmm,
The other thing I
hmm,
was trying to find, because this was like, let's just throw one more layer of data into this, which was the Financial Times released this study that said, is human intelligence starting to decline?
Hmm.
And the charts are performance and reasoning and problem solving tests. And they did both teenagers and adults. It's hard to not connect all the dots, which I
Yeah.
don't know if they're all connected, but observations and information about the impact of previous decisions on previous generations mixed with what's happening right in front of us with phones and TikTok and all that kind of stuff. And I'm not a big TikTok user, but there's a feature where you can kind of fast forward to get information. There's so much on TikTok that's not junk. spokesperson for the integrity of TikTok. There's so much on TikTok that's genuinely educational. And there are times where I'm watching and you can press your finger on side of the screen and it fast forwards the speed of the thing. And there's so many instances where on Instagram and other things, I wish I could get the information faster
Huh.
because you get used to being able to put your thumb down and get it faster. And you still get all the information, but all the TikTok, I mean, there's some long form TikToks that are like 10 minutes or whatever. Even if it's a case study on something, that you have that user choice to speed
Huh.
it up is like outstanding. But then it does make me wonder in the places where you don't have control over, first of all, the start and finish, like you have to package up when you make these reels on TikTok or, you have to package up. So there's a start, there's a story, and there's a like a nugget at
Conclusion.
the end or whatever. Yeah.
No.
And so you're going to get some conclusion at the end. You're in a little micro movie of sorts, even if it's just somebody getting ready and talking about their life, or if it's some genuine educational thing from Forbes or whoever, you know.
Is this why when you and I are on a Zoom call, I see you doing this often when I'm talking too much? When I'm trying to make a point, I see your thumb come out.
To the
Now it all
end.
makes sense. Now, hurry it up. Hurry it up, Jeet.
Give me the bottom line.
I'm tired of listening to you.
But it's also like think about the volume of information that comes at people on a regular
Yeah,
basis,
yeah,
any
yeah,
age,
yeah.
especially if you're in some kind of corporate role. There's constant inputs.
Yeah, I wonder if long term, like generations to come, will they find ways to tap into that wiring to achieve a positive outcome? So rather than us losing the ability to reason deeply and things like that because we're used to short clips and all that, is there a way to tap into our maybe our short attention spans and our ability to become hooked on our screens, tap into that to develop our ability to reason,
Mm.
to improve our understanding of the world and things like that. I think about like Mark Rober. I watched some of his videos on YouTube. They tend to be a little bit longer, but very, very educational. Um, and it seems one of his intents, besides advocating for his crunch labs, he uses it as an opportunity to talk about how science um, benefits our lives on a daily
Mhm,
basis,
mhm.
and the sort of the joys of using science to solve problems and things like that. So he's a very good advocate for using our reasoning skills
Mhm.
to solve problems and make our lives better. Um, but that's just one influencer, one channel, and
Yeah,
there's a lot of others that are.
There's a
yeah,
lot of
yeah.
others, but maybe it will bring a different demand for insight, you know, like that people don't have to work so hard to get what is the insight from any piece of content or perspective or whatever. And then there's also like, to your point about Gen Z and how they're changing buying modes, this is also where you think about something like the Netflix experiences, the pop-up shops, the changes in what they're offering and how they're offering it from an experience perspective that I think it'll be interesting. Remember the Heineken's Good Times Index, where they were
Oh,
like putting
yeah, that's
research
right.
into how do you
That's right.
measure people's experience, and then that was part of how they marketed beer.
Yeah, yeah.
So I wonder if it will also force innovation. Oh, by the way, unrelated, but I saw what company was it? Must have been Heineken. They were doing a marketing campaign for Succession for Irish pubs. This launched on St. Patty's Day, and it was so sweet. You find an Irish
Hmm.
pub owner who's ready to retire. There's no successor. They run a campaign to have people apply to be the successor of the Irish pub and own the pub, take over from the original person. And
Wow.
because Heineken's behind it, gets all this attention, people go, apply, whatever, and like think about how brands can potentially elevate for good in places where it might not have happened otherwise. So maybe that's just my
Huh.
silver lining, but I'm like, that was so cute.
That's
That's
great.
cool.
That's great.
Were you going to
Shall
say?
we wrap this one up?
Yeah. All right. So we'll come back to Economy 2.0. Greg, thank you once again for joining us
Oh, it's
for a
my
Greg
pleasure. This was a
special.
lot of fun. A lot of fun. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Greg.
All
Awesome.
right.
Really appreciate
All
it.
right.